While others found normal partners. I met a harsh alien princess. Marcus Chun had always been the odd one out among his friends. While they dated cheerleaders, artists, and accountants, he found himself inexplicably drawn to the impossible. Maybe that's why he was the only human brave enough to apply for the Galactic Exchange Program when the portal gates opened 3 years ago. The recruitment officer, a blue-skinned Viridian with too many eyes, had looked at his application with what Marcus assumed was amusement. You understand, human, that most species find your kind primitive, loud, emotionally unstable. Marcus had shrugged. Sounds like my last performance review. Now, standing in the crystalline halls of the Zephyrian Imperial Academy on Kepler 442b, Marcus wondered if his friends back on Earth were right to call him insane. The gravity here was 1.3 times Earth normal, making every step feel like he was wearing lead boots. The air tasted metallic, and the twin suns cast everything in an eerie purple glow that made his head ache. But none of that compared to the stairs. Zephyrian students towered over him at nearly 8 feet tall, their silver skin catching the light like living mercury. Their elongated skulls housed brains that processed information at superhuman speeds, and their 4 arms moved with mechanical precision. They whispered in their melodic language as he passed, words that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Marcus checked his universal translator for the 100th time that morning. The device, surgically implanted behind his left ear, was supposed to make communication seamless. But it couldn't translate contempt. The human arrives, one student said, not bothering to lower his voice. How fascinating that the Academy accepted a specimen with such limited cognitive capacity. Another laughed, a sound like silver bells. I heard it takes them nearly 18 of their years just to reach basic intellectual maturity. Imagine being so slow. Marcus forced himself to keep walking. He'd heard worse on Earth, usually from his own species. At least here, the insults came with beautiful voices and faces that looked like they were carved from moonlight. The Academy's main hall stretched before him like a cathedral made of living crystal. Holographic displays showed star charts, mathematical formulas that hurt to look at, and what appeared to be poetry written in equations. Students glided between learning pods that hummed with energy, their multiple hands manipulating data streams that moved too fast for human eyes to follow. Marcus pulled up his class schedule on his wrist display. Introduction to Quantum Linguistics. He'd been studying for months, but Zephyrian educational methods assumed students could process information at roughly 50 times human speed. His human brain felt like a Stone Age computer trying to run modern software. The classroom was a sphere suspended in the building's central core, accessible only by anti-gravity platforms that responded to thought rather than physical controls. Marcus closed his eyes, focused his mind on up, and felt his stomach drop as the platform launched him toward his destination. He was the first to arrive, which gave him time to study the room's impossible architecture. The sphere's interior had no fixed orientation. Desks and chairs jutted out from every surface, defying gravity and human understanding. Students could sit on the ceiling, walls, or floor with equal comfort, their anti-gravity fields keeping them anchored. Other students began arriving, their platforms moving with the fluid grace that came from a lifetime of mental-machine interface. They arranged themselves in complex, three-dimensional patterns that probably had deep cultural significance. Marcus picked a spot on what he arbitrarily decided was the floor and hoped he wouldn't embarrass himself. The instructor materialized in the room's center, literally materialized, assembling from particles of light. Professor Kawaiichera was old even by Zephyrian standards, her silver skin marked with intricate patterns that indicated high academic rank. Her 4 eyes fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. Today we discuss the intersection of temporal mechanics and linguistic evolution, she began, her voice somehow reaching every student simultaneously. As we know, language shapes reality at the quantum level. The very act of observation changes the observed, and the language we use to describe that observation fundamentally alters the universe's probability matrices. Marcus's translator worked overtime, but even with technological assistance, the concepts felt like trying to hold water in his bare hands. Around him, Zephyrian students absorbed the information effortlessly, their enhanced minds processing layers of meaning that existed beyond human comprehension. Mr. Chun, Professor Koitivra said suddenly, her attention turning to him like a spotlight. Perhaps you could share the human perspective on linguistic reality manipulation? The room fell silent. 200 alien eyes focused on Marcus, waiting. He could feel their curiosity, their amusement, their certainty that he would fail to contribute anything meaningful to their advanced discourse. Marcus took a breath, remembering something his grandfather had once told him about humans being too stubborn to know when they were outmatched. Well, he said, his voice sounding rough and primitive compared to the Zephyrians' musical tones, on Earth, we have this saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But that's not really true, is it? Words do hurt. They change us. A kind word can make someone's day, and a cruel one can haunt them for years. He paused, gathering his thoughts while the room's attention remained fixed on him. Maybe that's linguistic reality manipulation in its most basic form. We use words to change each other, to reshape how people see themselves and their world. It's not quantum mechanics, but it's powerful in its own way. Professor Koichira's expression was unreadable, her alien features giving no hint of her thoughts. The silence stretched until Marcus began to wonder if he'd just made a fool of himself in front of the galaxy's most advanced species. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the students, a tall Zephyrian with intricate silver tattoos covering her arms, spoke up. "The human makes an interesting observation," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made others lean forward. "Primitive does not always mean incorrect. Perhaps we have become so focused on quantum-level manipulations that we have forgotten the foundational principles." Marcus turned to look at her properly for the first time. She sat, or rather, floated, near the sphere's apex, her four arms positioned in what he was learning to recognize as a gesture of contemplation. Unlike the other students, who wore simple academic robes, she was dressed in elaborate garments that seemed to shift color in the light. More importantly, the other students defer to her in small, but noticeable ways. Princess Zalthara raises an intriguing point, Professor Koichira said, and Marcus felt his breath catch. Princess, of course. That explained the deference, the rich clothes, the confidence with which she'd spoken. The princess's four eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like he was being examined under a microscope. "Tell me, human," she said, "do you truly believe that primitive emotional manipulation can compare to the elegant precision of quantum linguistic engineering?" There was something in her tone, not quite mockery, but definitely challenge. Marcus realized he was being tested, though he wasn't sure what the correct answer might be. "I think," he said carefully, "that sometimes the simplest tools are the most effective. You can build an incredibly sophisticated machine to hammer in a nail, but sometimes you just need a rock." A ripple of what might have been laughter went through the class, though it was hard to tell with Zephyrian expressions. Princess Zalthara, however, remained serious. "An amusing analogy," she said. "But tell me, what happens when your simple rock encounters a problem that requires precision rather than force?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Then, you learn to use the rock more precisely, or you find a better rock." This time, the princess did smile, an expression that transformed her alien features into something unexpectedly beautiful. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The human exhibits the classic symptoms of his species' most dangerous trait." "Which is?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he might not like the answer. "Stubbornness bordering on insanity," she replied, but her tone held something that might have been approval. "The refusal to acknowledge when you are outmatched, outclassed, or facing impossible odds." Professor Koichira cleared her throat, a sound like crystal chimes. "Perhaps we should return to our regularly scheduled curriculum," she suggested. "Though I admit this tangent has been illuminating." The rest of the class passed in a blur of concepts that stretched Marcus's mind to its breaking point. He struggled to keep up, taking notes that probably looked like primitive scratches compared to his classmates' direct neural recordings. But he noticed that several students, and the princess in particular, seemed to be watching him with new interest. When class ended, Marcus gathered his belongings slowly, buying time while the sphere emptied around him. He wasn't sure why he lingered, only that something about the princess's attention had left him unsettled in ways he couldn't quite define. He was surprised when she approached him, gliding down from her perch near the ceiling with the fluid grace that all Zephyrians seemed to possess. "Marcus Chun," she said, pronouncing his name with careful precision. "I find myself curious about something." "Yeah," Marcus replied, then immediately regretted his informal tone. Did one address alien royalty differently? His crash course in galactic etiquette hadn't covered this scenario. "You came here knowing you would be inferior to every other student," she said, stating it as fact rather than insult. "Knowing you would struggle with concepts that we master as children." Why? Marcus considered several diplomatic answers before settling on honesty. "Because someone has to be first, don't they? First human in the program, first to try bridging the gap between our species. Maybe I'll fail spectacularly, but at least the next human will have a roadmap of what doesn't work." The princess studied him for a long moment, her 4 eyes moving in patterns he couldn't interpret. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said finally. "Perhaps both." "Probably both," Marcus agreed. "I've been told they're not mutually exclusive." Something that might have been amusement flickered across her features. "No," she said. "I suppose they are not. Walk with me, Marcus Chun. I would hear more about this human perspective on impossibility." As they left the sphere together, Marcus caught the stares of other students. He couldn't read their expressions, but their body language suggested surprise, perhaps even shock. A human walking with the princess was clearly not something they had expected to see. "So," Marcus said as they moved through the academy's crystal corridors, "when you said I have my species' most dangerous trait, was that meant as a warning or a compliment?" Princess Zalthara's laugh was like silver wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "With your species," she said, "I suspect there is no difference." The Academy's gardens were a marvel of alien engineering, where crystalline trees grew in perfect mathematical spirals, and flowers bloomed in colors that had no names in human language. Marcus and Princess Zalthara walked along paths that seemed to rearrange themselves based on some incomprehensible logic, the walkway flowing like liquid mercury beneath their feet. "Your species fascinates our xenobiologists," the princess said, her 4 arms moving in gestures that Marcus was learning indicated casual conversation. "Such a young race. Yet you achieved space travel through pure determination rather than evolutionary advancement." Marcus kicked at a pebble that wasn't quite there, his foot passing through what appeared to be solid matter. Everything on this world seemed designed to remind him how little he understood. "We're good at refusing to accept that things are impossible," he admitted. "Sometimes that works in our favor. And sometimes it gets you killed in spectacular fashion," Zalthara observed. "Your species' casualty rates during early space exploration were alarming." "Yeah, we're not great at the safety-first approach to discovery," Marcus said. "More like safety third, maybe fourth if we remember." They paused at an overlook that gave a view of the Academy's central spire, where advanced students practiced something that looked like controlled lightning dancing between their fingertips. The display was beautiful and completely incomprehensible, like watching gods play with physics. "May I ask you something personal?" Zalthara said, turning to face him with all 4 eyes focused intently. "Sure," Marcus replied, though he suspected alien royalty and humans might have very different definitions of personal. "Your application to the exchange program. The psychological evaluation noted that you have no family waiting for your return, few close friendships, and no romantic attachments. The evaluators theorized that you applied because you had nothing to lose on Earth. Is this accurate?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Having his loneliness analyzed and filed an official report was somehow more embarrassing than all the academic failures he'd endured. Wow, they really didn't pull any punches in that evaluation, did they? "Zephyrian psychological assessments are thorough," she said without apology. "But they often miss nuances that require cultural context to understand. I am curious about the nuances they missed." Marcus leaned against the overlook's railing, which adjusted its height automatically to accommodate his shorter stature. "They weren't wrong, exactly. I don't have a lot of ties back home. But it wasn't because I had nothing to lose. It was because I had something to find, which was a place where being different was an advantage instead of a liability," he said. "On Earth, I was always the weird kid who read too much science fiction and asked uncomfortable questions. Here, being alien is actually useful. My perspective has value precisely because it's strange and primitive. Zalthara's expression shifted in a way that Marcus was learning to recognize as surprise. You came here not to escape being an outsider, but to be an outsider more effectively. Something like that. Marcus agreed. Plus, how many humans can say they've had a conversation with alien royalty? My social life might be non-existent, but at least it's interesting now. You assume I am royalty simply because of a title, she said, and something in her tone suggested he'd touched on a sensitive subject. Tell me, Marcus Chun, what do you know of Zephyrian political structure? Marcus searched his memory for the hastily studied cultural briefings. Your society is organized around intellectual merit rather than hereditary power. Leadership positions are earned through academic achievement and scientific contribution. The title princess indicates high rank in the scientific hierarchy, not necessarily royal bloodline. Partially correct, she said, her four hands weaving patterns in the air as she spoke. I am indeed royalty by birth, the eldest daughter of the Empress. But our culture requires that royal children earn their positions through merit rather than inheritance. I must prove myself worthy of eventual leadership through academic and scientific excellence. So you're under enormous pressure to be perfect all the time, Marcus said. That sounds exhausting. Zalthara's laugh had an edge to it. Perfect is the minimum expectation. I am held to standards that would challenge our most brilliant scholars, and any failure reflects not just on me, but on the entire royal line. I must be faster, smarter, more innovative than my peers always. Marcus studied her profile as she gazed out at the spire. And when was the last time you talked to someone who wasn't trying to impress you or competing with you? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for so long that Marcus began to wonder if he'd overstepped some cultural boundary. I cannot recall, she said finally. Most interactions are either academic challenges, formal court functions, or strategic networking. Even my relationships with other students are complicated by politics and social positioning. That's lonely, Marcus said simply. Lonely? She turned the word over like she was examining an unfamiliar artifact. I am surrounded by brilliant minds, engaged in stimulating discourse, challenged intellectually every day. How could that be considered lonely? Because none of those brilliant minds see you as anything other than competition or opportunity, Marcus said. They see the princess, the potential future leader, the academic rival. But do any of them see Zalthara the person? She stared at him with an expression he couldn't read. Your species has a curious ability to identify emotional states that we have trained ourselves not to acknowledge, she said. It is considered weakness to allow personal feelings to influence rational thought. Maybe, Marcus said, but it's also considered human to need connection with others. And despite all your evolutionary advantages, you're still fundamentally a social species, right? You need relationships, even if your culture pretends otherwise. Before she could respond, a group of students approached along the garden path. Marcus recognized several from his classes, their silver skin gleaming in the alien sunlight. They moved with the synchronized grace that suggested they'd been traveling together for some time. Princess Zalthara, the lead student said, executing a formal bow that involved all four arms in complex positions. We were hoping to discuss the quantum resonance project with you. Professor Veltar suggested you might be willing to review our preliminary calculations. Marcus watched as Zalthara's entire demeanor shifted. The moment of personal connection vanished, replaced by the formal mask of academic royalty. Of course, Keflas. I would be honored to contribute to your research. The student's four eyes flickered toward Marcus with barely concealed disdain. Perhaps we could speak privately? Some topics require elevated discourse. The dismissal was polite, but unmistakable. Marcus was being told he didn't belong in this conversation, that his primitive human brain couldn't comprehend their advanced concepts. Actually, Zalthara said, surprising everyone including Marcus, I believe Marcus's perspective might be valuable for this project. His species has an interesting approach to problem-solving that could provide useful insights. The students exchanged glances that needed no translation. The idea that a human could contribute to their research was clearly absurd to them. With respect, Princess, another student said, the quantum resonance project involves mathematical concepts that require neural processing speeds far beyond human capability. Including the exchange student would only slow our progress. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd been dealing with academic condescension his entire life, but somehow it stung more when delivered in beautiful alien voices by people who were objectively superior to him in almost every measurable way. "You know what?" Marcus said, stepping forward slightly. "You're absolutely right. I can't process quantum mathematics at superhuman speeds, and I probably don't understand half the concepts you're working with. But let me ask you something. When was the last time your approach to this project produced a breakthrough?" The students bristled at the challenge. Kethlos drew himself up to his full 8-foot height, looking down at Marcus like an adult addressing a particularly impudent child. "We have been working on quantum resonance theory for 3 academic cycles," he said stiffly. "The complexity of the problem requires patience and methodical analysis." 3 years, Marcus translated. "You've been stuck on the same problem for 3 years, using the same methods, expecting different results. You know what my species calls that?" "Enlighten us," Kethlos said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Insanity," Marcus replied. "We have a saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. Maybe the reason you're stuck is because you need someone who thinks differently, not someone who thinks faster." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus realized he'd just challenged a group of alien super geniuses in front of their princess, and, suddenly, wondered if humans could survive Zephyrian dueling customs. Then, Zalthra did something unexpected. She laughed. Not the polite social laugh she'd used earlier, but genuine amusement that transformed her features. "He makes a valid point," she said, looking at her fellow students with new interest. "Perhaps fresh perspective is exactly what the project needs." Kethlos explained the fundamental problem to Marcus. "Use simple terms." Kethlos looked like he'd rather explain quantum mechanics to a houseplant, but he couldn't refuse a direct request from the princess. "Very well," he said through gritted teeth. "We are attempting to create stable quantum resonance between particles separated by vast distances. The mathematical models suggest it should be possible, but every practical experiment results in cascading failure and energy dissipation." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind working through the problem. "So you can make it work on paper, but not in practice. The real world keeps interfering with your perfect equations." "Crudely stated, but accurate," Kethlos admitted. "Can I see your lab setup?" Marcus asked. The students exchanged more of those meaningful glances. "The laboratory contains equipment worth more than your planet's gross domestic product," one of them said. "Perhaps it would be better if we simply described—" "I'm not going to break anything," Marcus interrupted. "I just want to see how you've built your experiment. Sometimes the problem isn't in the theory, it's in the implementation." Zalthara stood gracefully, her decision clear. "An excellent suggestion. Let us visit the laboratory." As they walked toward the Academy's research wing, Marcus caught Zalthara watching him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. It might have been curiosity or amusement or something else entirely. But for the first time since arriving on this impossible world, he felt like he might actually have something to contribute beyond comic relief. The Quantum Resonance Laboratory was a cathedral of science, filled with equipment that seemed to bend space around itself. Crystalline structures hummed with barely contained energy, and holographic displays showed particle interactions in real time. Marcus felt like a caveman visiting a space station. But as Kethlos explained their experimental setup, Marcus began to see something the Zephyrians had missed. Their approach was elegant, mathematically perfect, and completely isolated from environmental variables. They'd created a system so sophisticated that it couldn't handle the messy realities of actual physics. "You're trying to eliminate all external influences," Marcus said, studying the isolation chamber that contained their quantum particles. "But what if the environment isn't interference? What if it's part of the equation?" "Impossible," Kethlos said immediately. "External variables would destabilize the resonance." "Maybe," Marcus said, "or maybe they're necessary for stability. On Earth, we learned that ecosystems work because of complexity, not despite it. What if your quantum system needs some chaos to function properly?" The suggestion was met with skeptical silence. But Marcus noticed that Zalthara was studying the equipment with new eyes, her brilliant mind already working through the implications of his crude human insight. Fascinating, she murmured. The human suggests we have been solving the wrong problem entirely. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself standing in the same laboratory, watching Princess Zalthara and her team celebrate their first successful quantum resonance test. The celebration was typically Zephyrian, polite, restrained, and conducted with academic dignity. But Marcus could see the excitement in their movements, the way their forearms gestured more rapidly than usual. The environmental integration approach has yielded a 37% increase in stability, Kethlos reported, his tone grudgingly respectful. The human suggestion to embrace chaos rather than eliminate it appears to have been insightful. Marcus tried not to smile. 3 weeks ago, Kethlos had treated him like a lab accident. Now he was being called insightful, which felt like winning the academic lottery. Insightful and completely backwards to everything we've been taught, another student added. Who would have thought that adding complexity could create stability? Marcus's species specializes in counterintuitive solutions, Zalthara said, her four eyes focused on the successful resonance display. They approach problems from angles we would never consider because they lack our theoretical frameworks. Is that a compliment or an insult? Marcus asked. Both. She replied with what he'd learned was her version of smile. Your ignorance of proper methodology allows you to see solutions that our education blinds us to. The past 3 weeks have been transformative for Marcus in ways he hadn't expected. His contribution to the Quantum Resonance Project had earned him a grudging acceptance among the Zephyrian students. More importantly, it had given him regular opportunities to work closely with Princess Zalthara, and he was beginning to understand that beneath her royal composure lay a brilliant, curious, and surprisingly lonely individual. Princess, Professor Veltar's voice echoed through the laboratory as he materialized via holographic projection. The Imperial Science Council has requested a preliminary report on your project. They're most interested in this innovative methodology. Marcus watched Zalthara's posture straighten, her forearms moving into formal positions. The casual academic discussion instantly transformed into something more serious. Of course, Professor, she replied. I shall prepare a comprehensive analysis immediately. Excellent. And, Princess, the Council specifically mentioned their interest in understanding how external consultation influenced your approach. They wish to evaluate the potential benefits of unconventional perspectives in future research initiatives. The hologram disappeared, leaving the laboratory in thoughtful silence. Marcus realized that everyone was looking at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to concern. What does that mean? He asked. It means, Zalthara said carefully, that you have attracted the attention of the most powerful scientific minds in our empire. This could be either very good or very dangerous for you. Dangerous how? Kethlos answered before the princess could respond. The Imperial Science Council does not simply evaluate research. Marcus, they evaluate potential. If they believe you represent a valuable resource, they may decide that your insights would be better utilized in service to the Empire rather than in casual academic exchange. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the laboratory's climate control. You mean they might not let me return to Earth? The Council has broad authority over matters of scientific importance, Zalthara said, her tone diplomatically neutral. But such decisions are not made lightly. You would need to demonstrate truly exceptional value to warrant such attention. The conversation was interrupted by an incoming communication alert. Zalthara activated the holographic display, revealing a Zephyrian official whose elaborate robes and ornate silver markings indicated very high rank. Princess Zalthara, the official said, his forearms positioned in gestures that Marcus couldn't interpret, but which made everyone else in the laboratory snap to attention. I am Chancellor Mordeth of the Imperial Science Council. We require your immediate presence for consultation regarding your recent research breakthrough. Of course, Chancellor, Zalthara replied smoothly. Shall I bring my research team? Unnecessary. This consultation concerns matters of imperial policy rather than technical details. However, the Chancellor's four eyes fixed directly on Marcus through the holographic display. We do require the presence of the human consultant. His perspective will be essential for our evaluation. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Being personally summoned by alien government officials was definitely not covered in his exchange program orientation materials. When would be convenient, Chancellor? Zalthara asked. Immediately. A transport will arrive shortly to escort both of you to the Imperial complex. Please ensure the human understands the significance of this summons. The hologram disappeared, leaving the laboratory in tense silence. Marcus looked around at the Zephyrian students, noting their obvious anxiety. Even Kethlos, who usually maintained perfect academic composure, seemed disturbed. Okay, Marcus said, breaking the silence. On a scale of 1 to 10, how worried should I be right now? The Imperial Science Council has summoned exactly 3 non-Zephyrians in the past century, Zaltharos said quietly. 2 were never seen again. The third became the most influential xenotechnology advisor in galactic history. So either fame and fortune or complete disappearance, Marcus summarized. No pressure at all. Marcus, Zaltharos said, moving closer to him with an urgency he'd never seen in her before. When we speak to the Council, let me handle the formal protocols. Answer their questions honestly, but do not volunteer additional information. They will be evaluating not just your knowledge, but your potential value to the Empire. And if they decide I'm too valuable to let go, her expression was grave. Then you will learn what it truly means to be an alien in a society that prizes useful tools above individual freedom. The transport arrived within minutes. A sleek vessel that seemed to be made of living crystal, its surface shifting and flowing like liquid mercury. As they boarded, Marcus noticed that there were no obvious controls or crew. The ship apparently flew itself, responding to some form of artificial intelligence that was far beyond human understanding. The journey to the Imperial complex took them over landscape that looked like something from Fever Dream. Crystalline forests stretched toward the horizon, their faceted surfaces reflecting the twin suns in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Cities rose from the ground like grown rather than built structures, their organic curves defying human concepts of architecture. Tell me about your family, Zaltharos said suddenly, breaking the contemplative silence. Marcus glanced at her, noting the tension in her posture. Why do you want to know? Because the Council may use personal attachments as leverage in their negotiations. I need to understand what they might offer you or threaten. Marcus considered lying, then decided honesty was probably safer given the circumstances. There's not much to tell. My parents died in a car accident when I was 16. No siblings. I was raised by my grandfather, but he passed away 2 years ago. Like your evaluation said, I don't have many ties back home. No romantic attachments. No deep friendships. None significant enough to base life decisions on, Marcus admitted. I guess that makes me either a perfect candidate for this program or a really sad person, depending on how you look at it. Zaltharaz's 4 arms moved in patterns he'd learned indicated deep thought. It makes you dangerous, she said finally. How do you figure? A person with nothing to lose is unpredictable. The Council prefers individuals who can be controlled through their attachments to others. Your independence makes you difficult to manage. The transport began its descent toward a structure that defied Marcus's ability to process visual information. The Imperial complex seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its walls and towers folding through space in ways that made his eyes water. As they landed, he felt reality reassert itself with a jarring snap. Remember, Zalthara whispered as they disembarked, let me handle the protocols. Answer honestly but briefly. And whatever they offer you, whatever they threaten, remember that you are still a guest here, not a subject. The complex's interior was a symphony of impossible architecture and alien majesty. Corridors stretched in directions that shouldn't exist, and gravity seemed to be more of a suggestion than a law. Marcus followed Zalthara through passages that reconfigured themselves as they walked, trying not to think about how thoroughly lost he would be if left alone. They arrived at a chamber that felt less like a room than a pocket dimension. The Imperial Science Council sat, or floated, or existed, in arrangements that formed complex geometric patterns in the space around Marcus and Zalthara. Chancellor Mordeth occupied the central position, his ornate robes somehow managing to look even more elaborate in person. Princess Zalthara, the Chancellor said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. Your recent research represents a fascinating departure from traditional Zephyrian methodology. Please explain how this human's involvement influenced your approach. Zalthara launched into a detailed technical explanation, her four arms weaving intricate patterns as she described their quantum resonance breakthrough. Marcus listened with growing admiration for her diplomatic skills. She managed to credit his contribution while emphasizing her own leadership and the project's adherence to Zephyrian academic standards. Most illuminating, Chancellor Mordeath said when she finished. And now, Mr. Marcus Chun, we would hear your perspective on these events. Marcus felt the weight of 24 alien gazes focusing on him with laser intensity. The council members were evaluating every word, every gesture, every breath. He thought about Zalthara's advice to be honest, but brief. The princess and her team had already done the hard work, he said simply. I just suggested that maybe their problem wasn't technical, but conceptual. Sometimes when you're really smart, you can overthink solutions and miss the obvious answer. And what was the obvious answer in this case? That chaos isn't always the enemy of order. Sometimes it's what makes order possible in the first place. The council members exchanged communications in their rapid musical language, their conversation flowing too quickly for Marcus's translator to follow. He caught fragments, words about potential, utility, risk assessment, and strategic value, but the overall meaning eluded him. Finally, Chancellor Mordeath spoke again. Mr. Chun, your contribution to Princess Zalthara's research has been noteworthy. The Empire recognizes the potential value of your unique perspective on complex problems. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. This was starting to sound like the prelude to an offer he might not be able to refuse. We have a proposition for you, the Chancellor continued. Remain here as a permanent consultant to the Imperial Science Council. You would be provided with resources, accommodations, and research opportunities beyond anything your homeworld could offer. In return, you would assist our scholars in approaching problems from your species' distinctive angle. And if I choose to return to Earth as originally planned? The Chancellor's expression was unreadable, but something in his posture suggested that refusing might not be a viable option. The exchange program agreement allows for voluntary extension of service. However, given the strategic importance of your contributions, we would naturally need to evaluate the wisdom of allowing such valuable insights to return to a primitive world where they might be wasted. Marcus looked at Zalthara, hoping for some guidance, but her face was a mask of careful neutrality. Whatever she was thinking, she couldn't express it in front of the council. Can I have some time to consider the offer? Marcus asked. Of course, Chancellor Mordeath replied smoothly. Take all the time you need. We are patient beings, and such important decisions should not be rushed. But as Marcus and Zalthara left the chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that his time was running out faster than anyone was willing to admit. The Academy's late shift hours provided the first privacy Marcus had experienced since his summons to the Imperial Complex. Most students had returned to their dormitories, leaving the crystal corridors empty and eerily beautiful under the gentle glow of bioluminescent wall panels. He found Princess Zalthara in her private study, surrounded by holographic displays showing complex mathematical models. Working late? He asked, settling into a chair that molded itself to accommodate his human physiology. Researching precedent, she replied without looking up from her calculations. The last non-Zephyrian who received a similar offer from the council was a Zarathian mathematician named Telvok. His case file makes for interesting reading. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What happened to him? Officially, he became the Empire's chief xenotechnology advisor and revolutionized our understanding of multidimensional physics. His innovations advanced our civilization by centuries. And unofficially, Zalthara finally turned away from her displays, her four eyes fixing on Marcus with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Unofficially, Telvok was never seen outside the Imperial Research Complex again. No communications with his homeworld, no personal relationships, no life beyond his assigned research projects. He became a very valuable, very isolated tool. So my choice is between returning to Earth or becoming a brilliant prisoner, Marcus summarized. That's not really a choice at all. No, Zalthara agreed. It is not, which is why I've spent the last 6 hours researching alternatives. She gestured, and the holographic displays shifted to show what appeared to be legal documents written in flowing Zephyrian script. The exchange program agreement contains certain protections for participating students, she explained. But those protections have never been tested against council authority. However, there is one precedent that might be relevant, which is royal protection protocols, Zalthara said, her tone carefully neutral. Under ancient Zephyrian law, individuals under royal protection cannot be compelled into involuntary service, even by the Imperial Science Council. The law was created to prevent political rivals from using the council as a weapon against royal family members. Marcus leaned forward, sensing that she was leading to something important, but not sure what. That's interesting historically, but I'm not sure how it helps me. It helps you, Zaltharos said quietly, if you were to become eligible for royal protection. The implications of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at her, trying to read the alien expressions that he was only beginning to understand. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? He asked carefully. I am suggesting, she replied, her forearms moving in formal patterns, that certain traditional customs might provide legal pathways to protection that the Council could not override without creating a constitutional crisis. Marcus felt his world tilting off its axis. Zalthara, are you talking about marriage? I'm talking about survival, she said firmly. Yours specifically, though I admit the method I am proposing would be unconventional. Marcus stood and began pacing, his mind racing through the implications. This is insane. You're a princess of an advanced alien civilization. I'm a primitive human who barely understands your technology. What possible reason would you have for even considering such a thing? Several reasons, Zalthara replied, rising gracefully from her chair. First, as you noted, preventing your involuntary servitude to the Council. Second, the political advantages of demonstrating that the royal family values diversity and innovation over traditional prejudices. And third, she paused, her alien features showing what Marcus had learned to recognize as vulnerability. And third, he prompted. And third, because you're the first being I have met who sees me as Zalthara rather than Princess Zalthara. The first who speaks to me without calculation or fear or desire for advancement. The first who challenges my ideas not to demonstrate their own intelligence, but because they genuinely believe I might be wrong about something. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her properly. In the soft light of her study, with her formal royal demeanor relaxed, she looked less like an alien princess and more like a brilliant, lonely individual who had found an unexpected connection. You're serious about this, he said. Completely serious, she confirmed. Though I should note that Zephyrian marriage customs are quite different from human traditions. It would be a political and legal alliance rather than a romantic union, at least initially. Initially, our species forms emotional attachments over time rather than through immediate passion, she explained. Zephyrian marriages typically begin as practical arrangements that develop into deeper connections through shared experiences and mutual respect. Marcus sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the surreal turn his life had taken. A month ago, I was a lonely graduate student eating instant noodles in a studio apartment. Now I'm being offered marriage to alien royalty to avoid imprisonment by an interstellar government. Does this qualify as the universe having a sense of humor? I would not presume to understand the universe's sense of humor, Zalthara replied solemnly. But I do understand political necessity and personal choice. The decision must be yours, Marcus. I will not pressure you, and I will understand if you prefer to take your chances with the Council. Marcus studied her alien features, trying to imagine what such a life would be like. Marriage to a princess, even an alien one, presumably came with responsibilities and expectations he couldn't even begin to understand. What would it mean? He asked. Practically speaking, what will my life look like? You would become a member of the royal household, Zalthara explained. You would have your own quarters within the palace complex, access to the finest educational and research facilities in the empire, and the freedom to pursue whatever interests you choose. You would be expected to attend certain formal functions and to represent human perspectives in policy discussions, but your time would largely be your own. And our relationship? What would be expected there? Mutual respect, companionship when desired, and discretion regarding our private arrangements. Zephyrian marriages do not require cohabitation or exclusive emotional attachment, particularly in their early stages. We would be partners in a legal and political sense, but the development of personal intimacy would be entirely voluntary. Marcus found himself considering the proposal with a seriousness that surprised him. It was crazy, impossible, and completely outside anything he'd ever imagined for his life. It was also, he realized, the most interesting offer anyone had ever made him. "There's something else I need to know," he said. "Why are you willing to do this?" "Really?" "Because protecting me from the council can't be the whole reason." Zalthara was quiet for a long moment, her forearms weaving patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. "Because," she said finally, "you asked me when was the last time I had spoken to someone who wasn't trying to impress me or compete with me. The answer was that I could not remember. But I can remember exactly when it started. It was the day you arrived and called my academic theories interesting rather than brilliant, and suggested that sometimes the simplest tools are the most effective." She moved closer, her alien grace making the gesture seem like a dance. "You treat me like a person rather than a position," she continued. "You challenge my ideas because you believe truth is more important than politeness. You have shown me that there is value in perspectives that are different from our own, not because they are exotic, but because they are authentic. And you think that's enough foundation for a marriage?" "I think," Zalthara said carefully, "that it is a better foundation than most Zephyrian marriages begin with. Political alliances based on mutual respect and shared interests have created some of our strongest partnerships." Marcus looked around the study, with its impossible technology and alien beauty, trying to process the choice before him. Return to Earth and probably never see Zalthara again, or stay and bind his life to hers in ways neither of them could fully predict. "If I say yes," he said, "there's no going back, is there? This isn't a temporary arrangement." "Zephyrian marriage bonds are considered permanent," she confirmed. "Though they can be dissolved under certain circumstances, it is not a decision to be taken lightly. And if I say no, then I will help you prepare for your meeting with the council, and hope that your human stubbornness proves stronger than their desire to collect useful tools." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the crystalline landscape that had become familiar over the past month. Somewhere out, there was Earth, with its comfortable mediocrity and limited horizons. And here was Zalthara, offering him a future that was terrifying and impossible and utterly unique. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said without turning around. "Of course. When you imagine the future, your future, what do you see?" "Until recently," Zalthara replied, "I saw duty, responsibility, and the weight of eventual leadership. A life of service to the Empire with little room for personal desires or authentic relationships. And now I see the possibility of a partnership that might make both duty and happiness achievable. A future where being different is an advantage rather than a burden, where two outsiders might find ways to belong together." Marcus turned back to face her, and for the first time since arriving on this impossible world, he felt like he might have found something worth staying for. "Princess Zalthara," he said formally, "I believe I would be honored to accept your proposal." Her smile transformed her alien features into something radiant. "Then we should begin preparing immediately," she said. "Royal weddings require certain protocols, and we will need to move quickly before the council realizes what we are planning." "How quickly are we talking?" "Tomorrow," Zalthara said, and Marcus realized that his new life was about to begin whether he was ready for it or not. The royal marriage chamber existed in a space that seemed to defy the usual laws of architecture and physics. Marcus stood in what his human brain insisted was the center of a sphere, but his eyes kept telling him he was simultaneously at the top, bottom, and sides. Crystalline formations jutted from every surface, their faceted edges catching light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Princess Zalthara stood beside him, resplendent in ceremonial robes that shifted color with each movement. The garments seemed to be alive, responding to her emotions with subtle changes in hue and pattern. Marcus, by contrast, wore the finest formal clothing the royal household could hastily acquire for a human, which still made him feel like he was playing dress-up in someone else's costume. "Are you prepared for this?" Zalthara asked quietly, her forearms positioned in formal patterns that somehow conveyed both confidence and nervousness. "Probably not," Marcus replied honestly. "But I don't think anyone could really be prepared for marrying an alien princess to avoid imprisonment by an interstellar government. This isn't exactly covered in normal life preparation courses. The ceremony will be conducted in ancient Zephyrian, she explained. I will guide you through the responses, but the essential element is your willing consent. Our marriage laws require clear, uncoerced agreement from both parties. Marcus looked around the chamber, noting the assembled witnesses. The Empress herself was present, a figure of such commanding presence that Marcus felt like gravity bent around her. Other royal family members, high court officials, and senior academics formed complex geometric patterns throughout the space. Even the council members who had summoned him were in attendance, their expressions unreadable, but their body language suggesting barely contained irritation. They're not happy about this, Marcus observed, nodding toward the council. No, Zalthara agreed, but they cannot object without admitting that their offer was coercive rather than voluntary. Royal marriage protocols supersede council authority, and challenging the ceremony would require them to formally accuse me of treason, which they dare not do without evidence. The Empress raised her forearms, and the chamber fell into absolute silence. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones, the words flowing in patterns too beautiful and complex for human vocal cords to reproduce. She is reciting the history of royal marriage law, Zalthara whispered. The legal protections, the responsibilities, the ancient precedents that make this ceremony binding under imperial law. Marcus watched the assembled Zephyrians as the Empress spoke, noting their reactions. Most seemed fascinated by the unprecedented nature of the ceremony. A few appeared disapproving, but carefully neutral in their expressions. The council members looked like they were solving complex mathematical problems in their heads, probably calculating whether there were legal loopholes they could exploit later. The formal recitation concluded, and the Empress turned her attention directly to Marcus and Zalthara. When she spoke again, her words were translated by Marcus's implant, though something seemed to be lost in the conversion from the original Zephyrian. Princess Zalthara, daughter of my blood and heir to imperial knowledge, do you freely choose this union with the human Marcus Chun, understanding all obligations and protections that such a bond entails? I do so choose, Zalthara replied, her voice steady and clear. Marcus Chun of Earth, do you freely choose union with Princess Zalthara, understanding that this bond will make you subject to imperial law and protection, with all rights and responsibilities accorded to royal family members? Marcus took a deep breath, acutely aware that the next words out of his mouth would change his life forever. I do so choose. The Empress gestured, and two attendants approached carrying what appeared to be crystalline bracelets that pulsed with internal light. Marcus watched as one was fitted to Zalthara's upper left arm, the crystal seeming to grow and adapt to her physiology. When they approached him with the second bracelet, he held out his arm and tried not to flinch as the alien technology bonded with his skin. The marriage bonds, Zalthara explained quietly. They will monitor our vital signs and emotional states, providing legal proof that our union remains consensual. They also serve as symbols of our connection, visible to any who might question our relationship. The crystal felt warm against Marcus's skin, and he could swear he felt a subtle connection forming. Not telepathy exactly, but an awareness of Zalthara's presence that hadn't been there before. The Empress spoke again, her words formal and ceremonial. By the ancient laws of our people and the witness consent of both parties, I declare this union valid and binding. Princess Zalthara and Prince Marcus Chun are wed in the sight of the Empire. Prince. Marcus hadn't really considered that marrying a princess would make him a prince. The title felt surreal, like a costume that didn't quite fit. The ceremony concluded with complex musical patterns that might have been singing or might have been mathematical equations expressed in sound. As the witnesses began to disperse, Marcus noticed Chancellor Mordeath approaching with several other council members. Prince Marcus, the Chancellor said, his tone perfectly polite and completely venomous. Congratulations on your unexpected elevation in status. Thank you, Marcus replied carefully. I trust you understand that marriage to royalty brings certain responsibilities. The Empire will be very interested in ensuring that your unique insights continue to benefit our scientific advancement. My husband's time and talents are his own to allocate as he sees fit, Zalthara interjected smoothly. As a member of the royal family, he is protected from involuntary service to any imperial agency. Of course, Chancellor Mordeath agreed, though I'm sure Prince Marcus recognizes the value of contributing to the greater good of the Empire that has welcomed him so generously. The exchange was polite, diplomatic, and utterly threatening. Marcus realized that while his marriage might protect him from imprisonment, it wouldn't stop the council from finding other ways to pressure him into service. Chancellor, Marcus said, surprising himself with his own boldness, I appreciate the Empire's generosity in accepting me. I look forward to contributing to scientific advancement in whatever ways I can, as a free citizen rather than as a compelled asset. The Chancellor's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested that Marcus had just declared war in the most polite possible terms. As the council members departed, Zalthara moved closer to Marcus, her forearms weaving patterns that conveyed relief, mixed with apprehension. That went well, she said quietly. Did it? Because I feel like we just painted targets on our backs. We did, she agreed. But we painted them as equals rather than as prisoner and captor. The council cannot simply take you now, but they will look for other forms of leverage. The Empress approached, her presence commanding even in the emptying chamber. When she spoke to Marcus, her words were carefully measured. Prince Marcus, you are now family. This brings privileges and protections, but also expectations. I trust you will prove worthy of the investment my daughter has made in you. I'll do my best, Your Majesty, Marcus replied, hoping that was the appropriate response. See that you do, the Empress said. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled, an expression that transformed her intimidating features into something almost maternal. Welcome to the family, son-in-law. Try not to let the council eat you alive. As they left the marriage chamber, Marcus found himself walking beside his new wife through corridors that felt different now that he belonged in them. The crystal bracelet on his arm pulsed gently, and he could sense Zalthara's emotional state, curiosity, satisfaction, and underlying nervousness about what they had just committed themselves to. So what happens now? He asked. Now we learn to be married, Zalthara replied. We establish our household, navigate court politics, and try to build something genuine from this strategic alliance. And the council? The council will test our resolve and look for weaknesses. But they will do so carefully because challenging royal marriage bonds directly would require them to prove coercion, and we have carefully ensured that evidence suggests otherwise. They reached what Marcus assumed were Zalthara's quarters, though the space was larger than any apartment he'd ever seen, with rooms that flowed into each other in organic curves. The architecture was unmistakably alien, but somehow it felt welcoming rather than hostile. These are our quarters now, Zalthara said, noting his examination of the space. I had additional accommodations prepared for human physiology, adjustable gravity, atmosphere controls, furniture that adapts to your proportions. Marcus looked around at what was essentially an alien palace apartment and shook his head in amazement. When I applied for the exchange program, I thought the biggest adjustment would be learning to eat alien food. The food will still be a challenge, Zalthara said solemnly. Zephyrian cuisine is optimized for our metabolic needs, but the palace kitchens have been researching human nutritional requirements. They've been researching human nutrition? For how long? Since yesterday, she admitted. I may have been optimistic about your answer to my proposal. Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had since the council summons. So you were confident I'd say yes? I was hopeful that you were as tired of being alone as I was, she replied, and that you would recognize the practical advantages of the arrangement. Practical advantages, Marcus repeated. Is that what we're calling this? Zalthara moved closer, her alien features showing uncertainty. What would you call it? Marcus considered the question seriously. They barely knew each other by human standards, yet somehow he felt more connected to her than to anyone he'd known on Earth. They were two outsiders who had found unexpected compatibility, two individuals willing to take enormous risks for the possibility of belonging somewhere. I think I'd call it the beginning of something interesting, he said finally. Something that might become more than just practical with time. The beginning of something interesting, Zalthara repeated, testing the words. I like that description. Good, Marcus said, because we're going to have plenty of time to figure out what that something becomes. Outside their quarters, the twin suns were setting over the crystalline landscape of his new home. Marcus Chun, formerly a lonely graduate student from Earth, now Prince Marcus Chun of the Zephyrian Empire, married to an alien princess, and protected by laws he barely understood from forces he was only beginning to comprehend. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but as he watched the alien sunset paint impossible colors across the sky while standing beside his brilliant, strange, wonderful wife, Marcus realized it might be exactly the life he'd always been looking for without knowing it. The council would continue to scheme, court politics would prove challenging, and learning to be married to someone from another species would undoubtedly present difficulties he couldn't even imagine yet. But for the first time since arriving on this impossible world, Marcus felt like he belonged somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, he found someone who belonged with him. As the last light faded from the alien sky, Marcus Chun began his new life as a prince of the stars, hand in hand with the harsh alien princess who had saved him from imprisonment and given him something far more valuable, a place to call home among the infinite possibilities of the galaxy. The universe, it turned out, did have a sense of humor after all. It just expressed it in ways that were stranger and more wonderful than any human could have imagined.